World leaders are turning up the pressure on Vladimir Putin. President Obama says Putin has direct responsibility to get the rebels to cooperate with the Flight 17 investigation. So how will Putin play all of this? We're joined by Cohen. He's the professor emeritus of Russian studies at Princeton University and NYU. He's also the author of Soviet Fates and Lost Alternatives, From Stalinism to the New Cold War. Also, Krista Freeland, she's a member of the Canadian Parliament for Toronto Centre, and she is banned from Russia in retaliation for supporting economic sanctions against the regime. Great to have both of you. You come at this from different perspectives. Krista, let me start with you. Is this a defining moment for Putin on the world stage?
Absolutely, and it could be a positive moment for Putin. This could be the moment when Putin decides to separate himself from these separatists, when he decides to stop supporting them, stop arming them, stop sending his nationals in to lead and train them. And if he does that, and he doesn't have to make a big deal of it, if he does that, the conflict ends and Russia can return to the world community. And we heard from David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, from President Obama today, some openings towards that. So I am hopeful that backroom conversations are happening with Putin, maybe led by Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, saying, look, there's an off-ramp for you.
That's an optimistic take on it. Stephen, what's your take?
Well, she's absolutely right. It's a defining moment. Let me give you the view inside Russia, because it brings a perspective we don't hear.
Yes.
Putin is being told, and I can tell you this 100%, by the group of 70 or 80 people around him, that this is his moment of truth. No matter what he's done for Russia in 14 years, if he loses eastern Ukraine to NATO or to any kind of Western influence, he will go down in infamy in Russian history. On the other side, people are telling him that we are spitting distance from an actual war between the United States and Russia, and he has to act cautiously. So it's fairly clear what his strategy is at the moment.
And what is that? But what will he do, given those two paths?
Well, he will try his very best, and I think Krista will probably agree with this, to get a ceasefire. But it's not in his power to give the ceasefire. The ceasefire will have to come from Washington and Kiev, because they're the ones who are attacking the eastern cities at the moment.
No, I know. So what you're saying is that the U.S. is backing Kiev in this civil war, and Putin is backing the separatists, and that it has to be a ceasefire that starts in Washington?
And Kiev. We're close to war, and we're missing that picture. We're close to war with Russia. This could happen. And the thing that's missing, whether Christia wants to call it a civil war or not, and interestingly, there's an article in the New York Times on the website today, the first one I've ever seen, and it'll be in the paper tomorrow, that from the moment the plane was shot down, Kiev stepped up its bombardment of these two large eastern Ukrainian cities, Lugansk, and Donetsk. In other words, under the cover of this tragedy, and I have to say I find this obscene, they redoubled the bombing of these Ukrainian cities. Now, whatever you think about the people in those cities, and their women and children, all the same, stop and think what pressure that puts on Putin. Well, no matter what he wants to do, that Kiev is doing this. That's why I say they got to stop the fighting right now.
See, economic sanctions?
The history of sanctions tell us that A, they don't work, B, they hurt the people who do the sanctions also, and in the end, sanctions are carried out by a government that doesn't really have a policy, but has an attitude.
So I know that you are cautioning everyone to wait until all of the facts come out. But what do you think, if Putin's fingerprints are on this weaponry, and that he did help train, or his soldiers helped train the people who launched this missile, then what happens to Putin? What do you think?
Well, first of all, that won't happen, because it doesn't make any sense, even the way it's formulated. Please understand that these missiles are jointly Russian and Ukrainian built. The whole defense complex of the Soviet Union was a Ukrainian-Russian, you would agree with that, enterprise. Secondly, the Ukrainian government has had books since the 1970s, when they were part of the Soviet Union. Thirdly, there are people my age, unlike you young women, and younger officers in the Soviet, Ukrainian, Russian army who know perfectly well how to fire these things. They didn't have to send an expert to Moscow to detonate this thing. This is just a silly question. So there won't be those kind of fingerprints.
All right, we'll see what happens in Europe tomorrow. It's great.